Thank you for sharing. It's great to see what you're actually doing in your regions. And that plays very well into what I'm going to talk to you about this evening, which is about local chapter empowerment. And this is something that at UNISEC we've been thinking about for a while and have taken a little bit of time to think about how we can help local chapters to develop their community and their activities and get more funding and just overall make your local chapter stronger, because together that will make us all stronger, right? So I'd like to go through a few ideas that we have with you. But before I do that, I actually want to tell you a little bit of a story. So in 1989, this is several years before the launch of the Hubble Space Telescope, the Space Telescope Science Institute, which is an American institute, began thinking about what their next major mission should be beyond the Hubble Space Telescope. And there was an engineer called Pierre Belly who actually came up with the idea of a passive cooling shield to an infrared telescope that would shield it from the sun's thermal background. And later that year, a workshop was actually held to come up with a mission concept for this telescope. And this gained support from NASA. So in 1993, the Hubble Space Telescope and Beyond Committee was actually formed. And this was formed after the Hubble Space Telescope camera needed replacing. And it also, if you remember, they had to go and correct the primary mirror of the Hubble as well. And NASA weren't really happy with the overall performance of that, and they weren't really happy with the Hubble or the thermal background that they were picking up either. And so the success of that committee actually picked up the idea again of putting together a cold infrared telescope, because the IR wavelengths, they're able to see through gas and dust clouds out in space from old stars much better than optical telescopes can. And also because the UV and visible light that was emitted from distant objects, galaxies and stars, would have been stretched by the expansion of the universe over time. So by the time they reach us, it's in the IR bands. And so also, unlike the Hubble, a cold telescope wouldn't be blinded by its own infrared emission. And so what you're looking at here is actually the document that was formed in 1989 by the Space Telescope Science Institute when they began thinking about this mission. And so several other committees were formed in the years that followed until the early 2000s. And that's where the project was actually renamed the James Webb Space Telescope. And funding was actually awarded by NASA to begin designing the primary mirror. So in 2005, the project entered a development phase, and in collaboration with ESA and the Canadian Space Agency, it passed its technology development reviews in 2007. And this was pretty critical because in the 1990s, when they created this concept, the original diameter of the primary mirror was going to be 6 meters, and it would require the sun shield, which was going to be even much larger. And they didn't know at the time if creating such a large telescope would actually be possible from a technical standpoint. They didn't know how they were going to launch it or how they were going to make it. They didn't know if they had the technology available then to do it, and if it could actually become a reality. And so what that did, though, was it actually enabled the start of a detailed design and construction process on the telescope. And so the critical design review that ended up being conducted on the JWST was passed in 2010. And so now you're talking 20 years of development on this one telescope, and then it entered its final design phase. So in 2016, the final construction was completed with, they actually used robotic arms to assemble the primary mirror segments. There's 18 primary mirror segments on the JWST, and they're in the shape of hexagons, because if you were to use circle mirrors, you'd actually have gaps between the mirrors. So they chose this kind of symmetry for the telescope so they could optimize its optical power. But it wasn't until 2019 that the mechanical integration was actually completed. And that was 12 years behind the original schedule. So it's a very long history and a lot of challenges that were faced looking at just, putting this mission together. So where's JWST? now? Well, you probably know that on the 25th of December last year, JWST was successfully launched on an Ariane 5 rocket from Europe's spaceport. And in roughly 3 days' time, it will actually have traveled the 1.5 million kilometer journey that it needs to be inserted into its L2 orbit, where it will start completing its missions. Now, the reason I'm telling you all of this is because JWST took 30 years to complete. It needed thousands and thousands of technicians, and those technicians came from over 15 countries. It needed all of that, as well as funding, for it to become a reality. And so it required constant determination on an incredible scale. And every single tiny step of the development of this telescope would have had an impact decades later. And so this is a brilliant story. It's a brilliant example of how a vision, no matter how unlikely it is, can actually be manifested into reality when you have the minds and efforts of many people who share that vision. And so that's something that I just want you to think about and remember as we go through the rest of this presentation and as you are undertaking your activities in your local chapter. So, local chapter empowerment. There's 4 things I want to talk to you about, and we'll be brief with each of these. But when we're thinking about local chapter empowerment, we're thinking about the philosophy behind it. I want to talk to you about UNISEC meetings and what that's going to look like going forward, as well as how we're looking at recognizing local chapters. And then I'll introduce you to the Congruent Systems program. So there's a quote that you can see on screen, which I'll let you read. But if you think about that quote, how can you apply this type of thinking to UNISEC local chapters? So are we actually in harmony together? Because local chapters have different processes, they have different needs, they have different goals, but we do share the same mission and the same vision. And so just to remind you, the vision of UNISEC-Global is that space science and technology are used by individuals and institutions in every country, rich or poor, and offer opportunities across the whole structure of society. And that would be used for peaceful purposes for the benefit of humankind. And the mission is that it will create an environment which will promote the free exchange of ideas, information and capabilities, and especially for young people, including those in developing countries and emerging economies. And that's a pretty big vision and a pretty big mission, but how do we actually do it? How do we go about achieving it? Well, the nature of UNISEC is that it's collaborative, right? And so diversity of thought and many voices is a really powerful thing, but how much are we utilizing each other's knowledge and experience? How much are local chapters inspired? How much are they encouraged? How much are they empowered? And how much are they helped by others within the UNISEC community to achieve? And so the idea behind the local chapter empowerment program is to really synergize our efforts. So by sharing successful systems and processes and opportunities that we've had through other local chapters, we think that we can strengthen each local chapter as well as the collective. And so UNISEC-Global is the hub of this, but each local chapter actually has the opportunity to be leaders. And so that's why this year we really want to help empower local chapters in the virtual UNISEC-Global meetings. And so the way that we'd like to do that is we'd actually like you to start hosting virtual UNISEC-Global meetings. And so what we're looking at doing is having that hosted by a local chapter twice per quarter. So as an example, next month, UNISEC Turkey is going to be hosting the UNISEC-Global meeting. And then we'll have another local chapter after that. And then UNISEC-Global will take over again in April. So UNISEC-Global will still provide the platform, the Zoom room and the registration forms, as well as any support that you'd need to be able to do it. But as the local chapter, you determine the theme and the content and organize the speakers and the moderator and the breakout sessions and the activities, and you really get to take ownership and control of that. And we are developing a virtual meeting guide to try and help with that and outline some of the ideas that we've used that could help you if you're setting up a meeting like that. And so this has some pretty clear advantages. You get to focus on the key activities and interests of your region. like what's relevant to you in your region, and really highlight that. And then if there's things that you actually need help with, or you want to put the focus on for the rest of the community to have a look at, to see if they can collaborate with you, you can do that in those meetings as well. And so you can connect with new contacts as well by inviting them to speak on your platform, whether they be in your region or externally, but to just try and help facilitate those connections. Because when you have a platform like that, it does generally attract people to speak. But as well as the other benefit
Nate,
is that—
quick question.
Yes.
So you said the local chapter will do twice per quarter. That means UNISEC-Global will do once per quarter. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You got it. And so you'll also be able to attract local attention, potentially with funding providers or partners or people who you can work on projects with as well, similar to like corporate memberships or corporate opportunities. And so we hope that that's something that is of interest to you. And what we'd be looking at doing is having this by self-nomination, essentially self-nomination or invitation by UNISEC-Global to host these meetings. The next thing that we want to do is we want to develop a local chapter of the year award. And so this is really something which we hope will encourage local chapters to show that they actually can make a difference locally as well as internationally, and show that consistent effort and determination, like they had in the JWST development, is what you need when you're building anything. It doesn't matter what it is. Sort of highlight that and reward it. And there's some ideas there on the screen about some of the ways that we could probably go about doing that, to see, you know, who might be nominated, or what the process might be in terms of selecting the local chapter for local chapter of the year. So there's different ways that you can get involved with UNISEC-Global activities, and we hope that you join as many of them as you can. That'd be great. And then the last thing I want to talk to you about is the Congruent Systems Program. And so the question up the top there, what are your key plans for the coming year? Well, we want to provide the opportunities to local chapters, because a primary example of good practices is really, if you look at UNISEC Japan, it's the oldest UNISEC chapter. It was established in 2002. It's been extremely successful in Japan in terms of its funding, its programs, and its membership base. And so we think that this knowledge should be shared among local chapters to support your regional activities. Part of what we're going to be doing there is developing a operation handbook, and that will cover things like operations procedures, credo, and guiding principles. But we also want to hold an open seminar, which will cover some of that content that'll be in the operation handbook, but it'll be organized in a way that anyone can join of the local chapters. And we also want to provide opportunities for customized consultation to understand the local chapter's specific position and needs, and to cover things like building and maintaining memberships and communications and promotion, how to develop relationships with key players in the region, including space agencies, and what your operational structure currently is, and what, you know, what else you could possibly do, and many, many more topics on top of that. And so that's an opportunity which we hope that you'll take up as well, because these are just all optional. You don't have to do any of them, but any that you do, we will try and support you as much as we can. And so the thing that I wanted to actually end on with that, because I've put a picture of JWST back up in this final slide, which is the mirrors of JWST. And I wanted to just point out the way that the reflecting mirrors of JWST are arranged is that they have this ability to collect and focus a large amount of light, and they transfer that and that energy to unlock the secrets of the universe that, you know, are up to, you know, happened up to 13 billion years ago. And so I think that's a really good way to end our outline for the Congruent Systems Program, as a reminder that how individual parts reflecting the same thing can actually be focused into something really, really powerful. So thank you very much for your attention. And if you've got any questions, I'll be happy to answer.